U.S. dollar or by the U.S. because of the U.S. dollar. So they're looking to develop competing currencies, Russia, China, other countries as well. So it is a process. This usually takes a while. It took many years for the U.S. dollar to replace the pound sterling, but it is now underway. Won't happen this year, won't happen next year, but it's the beginning of another flaw for the U.S. dollar.
Jim, I wanted to ask you, and then recently you were speaking in Asia, and you were discussing, how, digital currencies, how pervasive they are in China, and, given how much their M1 and M2 have grown over the past decade, I mean, it's never before seen as far as the speed and sheer size. There's a big camp out there who think that the yuan will eventually be devalued at some point. But you did say, and you mentioned in the discussion that, someday down the line, you may end up buying yuan, and I suppose my question is, what factors would you have to see before you actually wanted to start buying yuan and holding your capital in yuan?
Well, I own some renminbi. It's probably my second largest holding of currency. I mean, it's minuscule compared to my U.S. dollar holdings, but no, I'm already there. Everything may go down against the dollar. When the turmoil comes and the U.S. dollar goes up a lot, everything will go down against it. I suspect that the renminbi will go down less than anything else. But no, when those days come, when currency turmoil comes again, you're going to see a lot of strange gyrations.
Yeah.
But James, I had rather own the renminbi than most other currency. I don't want to own the euro. I don't want to own the pound. I don't even want to own the Swiss franc. Most currencies are very seriously flawed compared to the renminbi, which also has flaws.
Sure.
But in the meantime, I own it.
Okay.
Now, as we're still on the topic of the U.S. and China, I was interested in getting your perspective on the trade war we're seeing right now. Where do you see this going?
I should ask you, Elijah. We all should ask. Unfortunately, Mr. Trump has no clue. He constantly changes his own mind and his own views. I do see that he keeps gathering more and more people around him who are keen on trade wars. So when things get bad again, he's going to come up with another trade tariff, trade war, however you want to call it. And in the end, we're all going to have serious problems. Nobody has ever won a trade war. It's not good for anybody. Everybody who's tried it in the past has learned, let's stop this as soon as we can. But unfortunately, Mr. Trump doesn't know history, and the people around him are very keen on trade wars. You should be worried. You should both be worried. We should all be worried.
Jim, you often bring up gold. I think everybody who interviews you likes to talk about gold because you definitely were involved in the 1970s and 1980 bull market last time. And this 21st century one, you definitely had a lot of commentary out there on the internet about it. Oftentimes you talk about, if this, turmoil that we just previously discussed comes around, you're going to see a lot of gyrations in currencies, possibly see the dollar get stronger like it did in 2008 for short term. You might see gold sell off, and that would probably be the opportunity. We had gold go to a low point in 2015 of 1050. And almost a 50% retracement like you typically talk about in commodity bull markets. They don't go up in a straight line. They always retrace about 50%. So 1050 has been the interim low recently in late 2015. Do you foresee potentially it reaching that again or possibly going lower if we really get some real turmoil?
Well, James, you should ask Elijah. I'm the world's worst market timer. I'm a horrible short-term trader. I expect to go under 1,000, at which point I hope I'm smart enough to buy a lot of gold. Before this is over, gold is going to go up a huge amount. And whenever people lose confidence in governments or currencies, they always have bought gold and silver. Maybe they shouldn't, but who cares? They always have, and they always will. So I'm looking for another. I've never sold any gold. I'm looking for another chance to buy more. But
if you don't mind me asking, people never ask this, but if you don't mind, I mean, it's kind of a personal question, but what type of gold vehicle do you like? Do you like bullion? Do you like coins?
I mainly buy coins. I do have some futures, but I mainly buy coins because coins are internationally recognizable and easily transportable. In a crisis, and let's hope we don't have a crisis, but if we do, you've got a block of bullion. You can't really go down to the grocery store and buy a loaf of bread. Guy doesn't know if it's real gold, and even if he knows it's gold and wants it, he can't make change. So coins, to me, are a much better way to deal with gold.
And one more follow-up. What's your favorite coin? I'm sure you have a preference.
Well, I have a few of the U.S. dollar coins. I'll show you one. The sovereign, very good because they're a little smaller and they've been around for 200 or 300 years. Many people in the world know them. The Chinese pandas, the gold pandas are great because in Asia they're very recognized. I own others, but those are probably the three that I own the most of.
Well, thank you.
Now, Jim, you were talking about how you see gold possibly going under $1,000. What specifically makes you think that it will fall further?
Well, if I'm right, and we do have this turmoil I'm talking about, usually they dump everything, whether we like it or not. You can sit there and say all day long, look, the fundamentals of this are great. The margin clerk doesn't care. The margin clerk says, Mr. Rogers, I can't help you. I got to sell you out. And that happens to people. And whether we like it or not, again, you look back at other bear markets, gold and nearly everything collapses at one point. And it may not happen this time, but it usually does.
Now, you mentioned in your talk recently about eventually governments all pushing toward digital currencies and such. I mean, how far out in the future do you expect? For instance, you have a daughter in her adult life. Do you presume that she'll be mostly in digital? Cash will be a novelty thing. It will be something that no one even uses.
I'm quite sure it's already happening. If you go to China, they don't have cash. I tried to buy an ice cream in China recently. I couldn't because all I had was money, cash, renminbi, and all she could take was, put your card here put your phone here on the spot. So in the end, she gave me the ice cream. I wish I'd been buying a Mercedes or something. I mean, cash has almost disappeared in China and other countries in Asia, so it's happening now. It's happening in Asia faster than in other places, but that's because Asia is mainly certainly ahead of the U.S. in many digital and internet happenings. Governments love having money on the internet because money's expensive, as you know. They got to print it, they got to deal with it, they got to transport it, et cetera, et cetera. So they love internet money, and they have much more control. They can call you up and say, James, you've been drinking too much coffee this month. Cut back. I mean, they know everything about you when your all the money's on the internet, and they love that. I don't like it, but governments love it.
One follow-up to that: in this next crisis that could come about in the banking system, do you see the United States even? There've been discussions about it, but negative interest rates are still out there, and right now interest rates have been going up, and the talk is that they'll raise more this year, but. I mean, maybe that's just to clear the room for dropping rates next time there's a crisis. Is it possible that the U.S. could possibly ever see NIRP?
Well, what's going to happen, James, is when the next crisis comes, when things start getting bad, everybody's going to call the central bank and say, you must save us, which means you must save me. And the government's going to panic. The central bank will panic. Because they're just bureaucrats and academics. They will do whatever they can. They'll lower interest rates, buy bonds, negative interest rates, whatever they think they have to do to save the markets. The markets will have a very nice rally when that happens, but unfortunately that rally will not last. That'll be the last peak, and then we get out because the market by then will know this is really serious, and the market has more money than the central banks, and at that point we'll have a nice, horrible bear market.
Yeah.
Now, currently, do you see that the U.S. Stock market is in a bear market? Because if you look at the chart of the Dow, it looks, it's making lower lows, and it's, we saw 3 or 4 months ago that huge correction, about 10%. So, do you see that we've hit the peak for the Dow?
Elijah, I'm going to tell you again, I'm the single worst market timer you will ever meet. I'm the single worst trader you will ever meet. I think that there's at least one more time of the markets going higher, and I'm invested that way, but I am, who knows? I don't know. It would be pretty easy if we could look and say, okay, this is it, but I suspect there's still another rally to come. It could be caused by lots of things. If North Korea and South Korea settle, that's going to cause a lot of euphoria around the world. I mean, who knows? Who knows what might cause it, and it might not happen, but I don't think it's quite over. I'm more inclined towards the fall of this year or maybe early next year.
And Jim, just because I haven't I've read some of your books, but as far as my recollections of your experience in the 70s and 80s. Could you give us a little bit of what your experience was in the commodity markets back then, especially pertaining to precious metals? One thing that often happens, I'm sorry to jump real quick, often happens people talk about the precious metal bull market in 1980 and they just go immediately to the Hunt brothers. But they fail to recognize that all four precious metals spiked within a few months of one another in early 1980s. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I remember it well. We owned a lot of silver. We even owned some gold. Then gold started, shooting straight up. And like everybody else who's been around for a while, we started shorting the spike. Shorted gold at $675 an ounce. And 3 weeks later, it was $875 an ounce. It was painful and it wasn't a lot of fun. Of course, 3 years later or 2 years later, it collapsed, totally collapsed. But no, I remember those days very, very well. I had actually started buying gold for my own self. I didn't have much money, but even had gold in my closet. It was illegal in the early 70s for Americans. It quickly became legal. No, I've been messing around with gold for decades.
Yeah.
Now, if you look back, at the 1980s bull market in precious metals, what would be like the single biggest advice for people who are interested in investing now in precious metals that you'd give for them that you learned back in the 1980s?
Well, Elijah, forget the 80s. From the history, if you've read any history of the world, everybody should own some gold as an insurance policy, if nothing else. Everybody. All of us have health insurance, fire insurance, car insurance. We hope we never use our fire insurance, but if we need it, we're glad we have it. So gold should be considered with that element, as far as I'm concerned. And if you know what you're doing and you get your timing right, then you might make a lot of money in gold. But everybody, every soul in the world should have some gold and silver in their closet or wherever they want to keep it as an insurance policy. And the more you know about gold, maybe you get your timing right, maybe you'll own a lot of gold. If I get it right and gold does go under 1,000, I hope I'm smart enough to buy a lot of gold and silver.
Recently, Jim, I saw a chart that was put out in the gold community about various M0s, M1s, M2s, and official gold backing. And it looks like today Russian ruble is the most gold-backed currency officially in the world. I think the M0 account requires about $2,400 an ounce in U.S. dollar gold terms to back up their entire M0 supply at the current moment. Russia, I don't know if you've ever invested there. I think you have. You mentioned recently that China is a place in the long term that you think will be a great market to be invested in. What other industries or sectors or things that you look out ahead, next decade or two that you're really interested in?
Well, for what it's worth, I own Russian government bonds in rubles. I bought more this week. I just bought more this week. Again, short-term Russian government bonds in rubles. Russia has much less debt than most countries, partly because nobody would lend money. Nobody would lend money to the Soviet Union. There's one reason they don't have much debt, and I see positive changes. I should say to you, James, I was negative on Russia for 48 years. I was a long-term bear. Now I'm bullish on Russia and the ruble and the government bonds and stocks. I own Russian shares as well. Agriculture, I'm extremely optimistic about, not just in Russia. America's put sanctions on Russia, so Russian agriculture is booming. Now they have to produce their own, and they cannot buy from other people, which is fantastic. I mean, we're shooting ourselves in the foot, we the U.S., because now the Russians are making all kind of money from agriculture. Worldwide agriculture, many reasons to buy agriculture worldwide. That's probably one of the reasons. I mean, there are other industries around the world. Chinese pollution is horrible. China's filthy. They're spending scads of money trying to clean up China. I mean, there are some industries that are going to do well, even if the world falls into a pit. Even if Europe falls into the sea. There's some industries that are going to do well. Agriculture, Chinese pollution, a few others.
Thanks.
Now, coming back to China here, you've talked about it in the presentation that you gave about the future of money. You also talked about this. James was noting that you see really the most exciting emerging markets are North Korea and China, and North Korea you can't really invest in. So China is the most interesting one that you can invest in. So can you expand a little bit on why you see China being very prosperous in the future?
Well, I also just mentioned Russia. I do have investments in Russia, and I bought more Russian ruble bonds last week. The United States stock market is near its all-time high. Germany, other major markets are near their all-time highs. The Chinese market is 40 or 50% below its all-time high. Japan is 50% below its all-time high. Russia's hated. I prefer buying markets that are depressed rather than jumping on a moving bus, because when you jump on a moving bus, you might get very badly hurt. So China's very large creditor nation. They save over 30% of their income. They work from dawn to dusk. I mean, many things are going right in China. That's not to say there are not going to be problems in China when the rest of us have problems. There will be. The Chinese government, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, had little debt. Now, even in China, there's debt. And the Chinese government, Beijing, has said, when we have problems, we're going to let people go bankrupt. I wish Washington would say that. I wish London would say that. I wish Tokyo would say that. But the Chinese communists, are better capitalists than we are, because they say they're going to let people go bankrupt. And that's going to shock a lot of people, including me. And I know what's coming. So there will be problems in China. But in the meantime, I'd rather buy Chinese shares than U.S. shares.
Well, great. I'm kind of running out of questions. I want to thank you for taking the time. I know it's a little late in Singapore. Thanks for meeting up with us this evening.
Well, James, I'm delighted you've run out of questions, because I've run out of answers.
No, yeah, this has been a great interview, Jim. Thank you so much. Did you want to share with the viewers, if they're interested in learning more, any last thoughts you had, and then where they can find you online?